Hey, hey, good morning, Lou.
Good morning. How are we doing?
I'm doing really well. And yourself? You having a good day?
So far it's good. Yes.
Yep. You've probably
Day
been
is still
outside.
young. Yeah.
Have you been outside? You must, because you go to the studio, right?
Yep. Yep. I've been outside. It's beautiful out. I mean, it's a little cool, but it's beautiful out.
Mm-hmm.
With these short days, with the sunset coming so early, you can't have clouds anymore. The clouds just drive you nuts. So a nice sunny day is nice. At least for the sunshine we get, we'll get for the day we get, we'll get sunshine.
Right, exactly. So was it chilly this morning when you headed out?
Not as chilly as yesterday, but yeah, it's chilly.
Yeah, it's
Yesterday was
coming.
the first time I was cold leaving.
Right. It's coming. It's coming, everybody.
Oh God, I know. Yep.
Well, hey, welcome everyone to Makeup or Breakup. My name is Judith Jameson, and I'm a love coach. And what that means is I work with men and women who are struggling in the areas of dating, marriage, or the possibility or inevitability of separation, which is
Yep.
typically a divorce, but sometimes it's people who have been living together for a long time and they just need help maneuvering that. If it's not too contentious, I can work with the couple for that. Otherwise, I'm on one person's side, helping them find good attorneys and financial planners and anything else that they might need, even a realtor. Sometimes people are, they have to sell their house. As we've talked about, it's not always practical to keep the house. So,
And sometimes people who aren't familiar with your services or your type of services will say, "Why would you do that?" And well, because your lawyer is $450 an hour.
exactly. Or at least
That's one
350.
main reason, anyway. Yeah.
Right. And that's what I love about it because, just a quick little reminder to people, this, but the reason why I got into this whole thing was I was not only going through a divorce privately, so people at work didn't know about it, but I was working for a law firm in Cambridge, and it was the family law attorneys that repulsed me the most. They were so like all about the money. They made fun of their clients after they left the office, especially
Yeah.
if they cried,
Yeah.
and they had no sympathy at all. Empathy, I wouldn't expect them to have empathy because they haven't been through it themselves. I mean, most divorce attorneys are like, holy crap, I'm never getting a divorce because I know, and their
I know how
wives
this works. Yeah.
and their wives and their husbands are saying the same thing, like, oh my God, like I
I'm not
can't.
divorcing my family law attorney husband.
Right. Yeah, that would be the worst person to divorce from would be a spouse that's a divorce attorney because you don't stand a chance. Assuming they're a fairly decent attorney, they know their ins and outs.
Plus, listen, they could be the best attorney going, but their job is not to hold your hand. Their job is not to emotionally counsel you. Their job is not to listen at $450 an hour to all the complaints that you have. That's not their job.
Right.
And they don't want to be doing that job.
Right. Exactly. But what I love about my job is as a coach, people are paying me for the ideas, for the pros and cons, as opposed to going to therapy where they're trained to ask questions so that you come to your own self-realization as they try to guide you, into making a decision. But for me, it's like, no, these are the three decisions. Pick one, and I'm going to tell you what's good and bad about each one. So unlike therapy, where people end up going for years because they're trying to, get their answers and thinking that it's, oh, maybe it'll happen in the next couple of sessions. And then it's like, well, maybe it'll happen in the next month. And it kind of doesn't. And it often drags on. With the coaching, it's so hands-on that when I decided to do this, I created that divorce coaching model that is now out there, but wasn't there when I was doing it. So when I started this, like whatever it was, 11, 12 years ago, everybody laughed at me because they're like, what the heck? I'm like, trust me, if you saw how these attorneys act, you'd want a coach like me because your therapist can't really make business recommendations. They can't really make business referrals. They
Right.
don't, if they haven't been through a divorce or whatnot, they don't even know like if an attorney is good or not. They may know a divorce attorney, but they don't know if they're good or not. Some of the
Right.
nicest people are the worst attorneys because they don't know their stuff.
Plus,
Um,
as a former paralegal, you have some legal
right,
expertise with which to advise. And
right,
again, attorneys don't want to hear about the affair that your husband had. They're just trying to litigate the case. That's their job. That's what they want to deal with, and they certainly don't want to deal with the emotional damage of it and
right,
how to react to it. They just want to know, geez, do you have an email from him I can use in the case?
right. Well, and that's the thing, Lou, that you and I know. The attorneys have to bill, Like that's how they get, right? They have to bill for every phone call that you call saying, oh my gosh, Bill came back 10 minutes late. Well,
Yeah.
really? I want to pick your battles there, because a 10-minute call is going to cost you, probably, 1/10, or could even be as much as a 15-minute
Yep.
increment of their hourly rate. There are very few that are under 300. I do know a couple. Those are in my back pocket. That's what my clients pay for.
Yep.
But for the most part, they're 3 to 375. I'd say 3 to 350 is the average range of the majority of attorneys that I'm working with. But I love what I do, Lou, because not only did I combine that paralegal degree and the legal knowledge with my life coaching and counseling classes, but I'm also a product of divorce, right? In two different ways. I was a child of divorce, so I know how children of different ages process it.
Yeah.
And then I went through a divorce, and I saw my 6-year-old son experience that. Then I went through my second divorce, yay me, because I am a poster child. I am a statistic. So statistically, second marriages will fail at a very high rate of almost 70%.
Yep.
And so I saw that, and I got to, life coach and guide and care for my son, who was then a teenager. So he was actually getting ready to go off to college, and he was so greatly affected by it. He might not admit this unless I did a deeper dive, but it's not a coincidence that summer he said he wasn't going to go to college.
Yeah.
I think it was like in June, shortly after he graduated, he announced, I'm not going to college next year. I want to take a year off. I'm like, that wasn't in the plan,
Right.
And so I was able to guide him through that as a professional as well as a mom. So when I'm working with my clients, whether they're going through a divorce or they're struggling in their marriage, which obviously I've been through that, no matter which area they need the help, like I've been there, done that, but I also have the expertise that an attorney doesn't have all of this. A therapist doesn't have all of this. I can guarantee no life coach out there has all of this. And even if they had everything, they might not have a divorce, or they might not have had 2 divorces. And so I love it. I really love being able to work with people, because I say to people, and you and I have talked about this, it's kind of like, I'm like your friend, but I'm not, because we have these friendly conversations when I'm working with clients, but I'm going to say things that a friend might not say, or I'm going to push you a little bit on something that you're not quite grasping. Like, wait a minute, I'm not going to be like your friend who just ignores what you just said. Friends already know that this is a difficult thing with friends. Like, they can only say so much, because even though we say, be honest with me, we don't really want them to be honest with us. Because if we were honest with our friends, we'd be telling them, run, don't walk. But how many people have you known who you've said, dude, look, she seems like a nice person, but I just don't think she's right for you. I think you should be kind of going out the door, not staying in there. And what do? They ignore you, and they probably have a little resentment that you said that about Sally. Like, you kind of risk your friendship. I've seen it even in my own personal life. Like, I don't know about you, but I can think of 2 specific times when I was brutally honest in a loving way, but I was brutally honest with friends, not even about marriages or anything. It wasn't even about boyfriends, but man, did I feel the ramifications of that. And those friendships aren't in my life right now, which I'm okay with moving on. But at the time it was pretty painful, because I'm like, geez, I thought we always had this pact. Like, if you ever see me derailing, can you let me know? Like, right. You know what I'm like? Have you ever had that experience where you're like, I don't know if I should say something or not?
Yeah. A lot of times, being that friend and trying to influence the outcomes, you don't know whether you should step in or not.
Right. Because
you want to preserve the friendship, and you don't know how it's going to turn out. You don't want to be the enemy of their relationship, especially if the relationship lingers for any period of time, because you're going to be on the outs.
Right. Exactly. And that's a very real thing too, which sometimes people don't think about.
Plus, people in relationships aren't necessarily listening to reason either, especially when they're distressed.
You know what? That's true. And what do we always talk about? That people stay in these things because of their own like interior needs that have to be unpacked. Like you always say it so well. It's like, what do we own when we look back at this relationship that we stayed in for more than like 2 dates? That, like, right now, right? We're talking about the narcissist, healing from a narcissistic relationship.
Right.
And one of the main things is in here, when they talk about the healing, and you always talk really well about this, it's like, it's really important to not just talk about the narcissist, but to look at ourselves, because something kept us in. There's absolutely no way after like a certain amount of time, we loved being in that relationship. That's the whole point here, right?
Right.
Is we're
Yep.
broken people after these people.
Right. Yeah.
But you know, that self-respect is difficult, Lou.
But the broken part of you, there was an aspect of you that was problematic during the relationship and before the relationship too. Yeah, you've taken some damage and some trauma from the relationship itself, but during the relationship, something kept you in.
Right.
Generally speaking, it was probably a fear of not being able to replace that relationship because of some self-esteem issues. That's probably what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But and it's different for different people. But
Mm-hmm.
you cannot, and we've talked about it with the narcissist, you can't change the narcissist. You can't modify the narcissist. You certainly can't change history. All you can do is examine your part in it and make changes.
Right. And it's so important to be doing this. I often say that coaching is for, like, when I look at coaching versus therapy, I look at my coaching as I'm the ER doctor, right?
Mhm.
Later on, when you go to the specialty department and then you leave, then you can work with a therapist if you feel like you really need it. I like working with coaches because they're very proactive. But while I'm working with a client, I'm also looking for things like a narcissist with the spouse, because it will help me explain to them over and over and over again, this isn't your fault. You were chosen. Which is not really a positive thing to think about, but you are. There's a reason why you stayed in it. But before you stayed in it for 3, 5, 25 years, that person was seeking, like you always say, which is great, seeking, what do you call it? Like their supply. Like they
Yes.
need that
Narcissist
person.
needs supply. Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I think we need to remind people that they're picked. And a better way for that is, it's like a predator is out there looking for their next victim, really.
Yeah, narcissists obviously need to project an image, and it's not a self-image. It's not something they believe. And part of the problem of their disorder is that they understand that it's that they're frauds about it, that their self-image is fraudulent. And what they try to do is they try to find people who preserve the self-image, people who buy into their image that they're projecting, people that buy into it, people that will continue it, people that will feed it. They are supply. And what they know is that over a period of time, as you get to know the narcissist, you start to see the cracks, you start to see behind the curtain a little bit, and they're deathly afraid of that. So they constantly need fresh supply. They need people who haven't seen behind the curtain, haven't seen the cracks at the seams, haven't seen behind the curtain of their image yet. So they're constantly cultivating new supply, and they're always trying to keep supply.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do is they find people who will spend a long time, because what happens is, and I was one of these people,
Mm-hmm.
what happens is you do see the cracks and you do see behind the curtain a little bit, but you ignore it. And you rationalize it and you write it off. And they seek people who will do that because that's a longer standing relationship than people who will just look at the cracks and look behind the curtain and see what's going on with the person and say, oh, no, I'm not going to deal with this. Those aren't the people they target. They target the people who are willing to rationalize that away.
Right. And it is so interesting and fascinating to me. So I have a new client that came to me through a friend, and she actually lives out in San Diego. And I just started working with her last weekend. And what's today? Tuesday. Yeah, a few days ago. Last weekend. And so picture this, Lou, because this is going to blow your mind, because we are talking about narcissists still. It is a pretty good run here. I don't care, because we have great conversations. The interesting part about it was, my friend who referred me to her said, so they met in college. They've been friends since they were in college, like at UPenn. And then my friend moved up here, and her good friend from college moved out to San Diego and then met this guy. So picture this. They've literally been married for like, I'm going to say like 32 years. They got married in their, early to mid 20s, like maybe mid 20s. The guy was just that it guy, right? Just had this charisma. Although interestingly enough, once they were together and married, she thought it was just, a sign of the economics of the United States, but it wasn't. He wasn't keeping jobs.
Yeah.
And it was always their fault. It's like, there was someone at work that was out to get him. There was someone that didn't like him.
Right.
There was just always an excuse with his job. So she dealt with that early on, like in her late 20s, which is really hard for a young person, right? Now, not because he isolated her, but she is out in San Diego and they've just got the few friends that they have. She's working her tail off, working like well over 40 hours a week because you just don't know when, whatever his name is, Bill, loses a job, right? And when he loses a job, this is the fascinating thing, ladies, or men, about the narcissist. When a narcissist is in that pattern of losing jobs, or even better, they quit a job because they're too good for it. Like, I shouldn't have to be, I'm in a management job and I shouldn't have to put together, an email listing, blah, blah, blah. That's beneath me. So I walked out. That's a narcissist. Yep. Because everyone knows in the real world, you can sign up to be the VP or you can be the CEO, but there are going to be things that you might have to do where you roll up your sleeves. Right.
Yep.
And any successful business person will tell you that. Well, this guy he was that guy, right? Like the loser that would often be out of work for couldn't find anything, Lou, to apparently even Dunkin' Donuts apparently was too below him. So he'd be out of work for like two years at a time.
Wow. Yeah.
So the fascinating thing though, is when I talked to my friend, she's like, Judith, this is so sad because, she's been suicidal in the past during, other relationships, like once or twice before she met this guy and committed to him. And she's been sort of talking about not necessarily using the S word, but people, when they get so frustrated and they feel like they're just so down, they use words like, things would be better off if I wasn't around. Right? Because people who have been tamped down and stomped on year after year after year with a narcissist, where they can never win an argument and they can never be right about anything. And their ideas are always put aside because the narcissist says, oh no, we're doing Christmas at noon, not at 2:30.
Right.
When that happens over and over and over, it's important to remember that, like with this woman, she truly has PTSD. She's been traumatized over and over and over again.
Yep.
The other thing that's kind of insidious that often happens, and it's a power thing, it's a control thing, but a lot of times, I'm not trying to be mean or anything to you, of course, no disrespect, but a lot of times men who are the narcissist
Yep.
will use sex as well as the dangling carrot of like, hey, if you cleaned the house and you got the kids ready for bed and you did all these things, then maybe Saturday night we can have date night. But then Saturday comes around and you're excited because you're going to have like dinner out and maybe sex later. And, Bill says, but, you're sitting there Saturday going, what time are we leaving? I got the babysitter lined up. It took me 6 hours to find a babysitter.
Yep.
Bill says, we're not going out. Now you're gaslighting, right? You're getting gaslit. And so this is her story. And she's like, over and over, like, I'd be looking forward to the Saturday. Okay, maybe no sex, but at least I'm going to have a dinner out. And he would be like, no, you know what? There's a Patriots game on and I'm going to watch that.
Yeah, but they know exactly how far to push that too.
But they know what they're doing. It's really not that he wanted to do he was going to wait probably till 5:00 to tell her, we're not going.
And then he will go against it, asserting his control again, but they know exactly how far to push that. And at the very last minute, they'll give you a night and they'll,
right.
And they'll pull you back in.
Right. And so you're exactly right, Lou. So what's happened to her is over time, it's like the only times that she would feel like there was a possible connection would be when they were having sex. And the problem with that, of course, is that you're hinging on these, 25, 40, whatever it is, 60 minutes of, probably not that long with this guy, but that time, because you're assuming that each time is another shot at intimacy, right? And that there's some vulnerability there. But for the narcissist, it isn't. It's just like you're the body that allows him to have this, right? Because there is no respect and there is no empathy, as we've talked about. So you literally are like a sex slave, a cook slave, a slave to the house, right? You're like a slave in the house. Like you do all the house chores and the kid stuff. But here's the interesting thing. So they ended up not having kids because she just felt like, not because of him, but because she felt, well, not because she didn't want to have kids with a guy like this, but because she had to work so much that she's like, I can't stop and have kids. I can't go on maternity leave for 2 or 3 months. I mean, how sad is that, right? So that's like her biggest regret, is that she never had kids. But now she's at this point where something you and I have talked about before, which is a statistic with domestic abuse, which is abusive people. I'm not even going to use the word violent at this point, right? But abusive people, which a narcissist is very abusive. An abusive person who's emotionally abusive to you, holds back things like dates and stuff like that, date nights, who are also belittling and verbally abusive. Verbal abuse will eventually lead to arguments, the ones where you can never win, because even if you don't assert yourself, they're just going to belittle you and yell at you over time. Yep. And the verbal abuse eventually will lead to physical abuse. It's a fact. People say, well, but I've been married for 6 years. That hasn't happened, Judith. I'm like, yeah, okay. Coach Judith is very well trained in this. I get trained in this every spring for 65 hours. This abuse comes later. It could be 2 years for you. It could be 20 for me. So Lou's marriage is different than Judith's marriage. Judith's marriage was different than Bill and this person. I won't say her name. So for her, remember they're now like my age or a little bit younger, probably like in her mid to late 50s. The physical abuse started about 5 years ago. So it is fascinating that is the trajectory. Like that's the thing that's launching her a bit, right? That's the thing that's making her feel suicidal again, because she can handle the belittling. She can handle like not having date nights, not having sex, whatever. She handled it over the past because in her 20s, she was getting into her career. And so she's a very successful executive for a very large company. If you saw her, because I do Zoom with her, you would think she's like, she's this really successful executive. Like her hair is perfect. She's got on beautiful outfits. She lives in a great big house, even though there's only the two of them. When she's in public, she's friendly. She's engaging, very well respected at work. To the point where obviously she feels like she can't confide in anybody. So she's purposely kind of isolated herself and hasn't really made friends at work. So she's made friends outside of work. She has a couple of friends in San Diego, and, it's her friends there that were saying, you need help. And so she did open up to her friend that I know here. But it's so sad, Lou, because it's taken that long. And really the writing's been on the wall for 15, 20 years. But it's probably, I'm working with her to try to show her the pros and cons of staying, leaving. What does it look like? Because she's
again, you rationalize, and it's a lot of times it's to preserve, we talked about the narcissist having an image they want to preserve. It's not a self-image because they know what's behind it. But a lot of times you want to preserve your self-image, and you want to preserve the relationship because you have some fears of never replacing that relationship. Right. Plus, again, the narcissists are very good. Part of their persona, part of the image they project is they're very popular and they're a catch, and you think you're very lucky to be with them. And that's usually backed up by them in public. They're usually the belle of the ball. They're usually the star. Everybody loves them. So you tend to think in herd mentality fashion, if everybody loves them, I must be the problem. You start to turn on yourself a little bit. They're very good at that. If you're very susceptible to it, they pick you and they manipulate that quite well. And you start to rationalize it off, and you just think, well, they're under a lot of stress, or I'm doing something wrong, or you just find ways, and this can turn into years. It easily can turn into years.
Right. Well, it's funny that you said that. Not funny, but interesting because, um, you know, it's one of those things where she saw it, but there really was this belief that goes back to childhood where she's not good enough, she's not enough. So
Yep.
she wasn't encouraged as a kid, and then she went off to college and she worked really hard, but then it was shortly after college that she met this guy. Like, timing is everything, Lou. If she didn't
Right.
meet this, if she hadn't gone to that bar that night, if she already had a boyfriend, she wouldn't have even turned to the right at the bar and talked to this guy beside her, you know. But it's so interesting what you said about the public and things, because I was going to say it, but I was waiting for you to finish. And it's funny that you said what you said, wingman, because get this. So because he's unemployed more than he's employed, right? Because God forbid he just gets a job at, Lowe's or anything, right? He's ingratiated himself around the neighborhood. So he's a jerk to her inside their house, but outside around the neighborhood, if he sees somebody like chopping down a tree, he'll go over and talk to the guy and say, hey, let me help you with that or whatever. Or
Yep.
he sees somebody putting up their new mailbox because the kids went by and slammed them all off. He'll go over and say with his hammer and be like, hey, my hammer is really good. It's more like whatever. Let me help you out. Like people in the neighborhood, they always bring him like, it's more like they're doing it for him because she works so much. She travels a lot. So she's not around that much, but she'll come home and there's like a plate of chocolate chip cookies. And she's like, oh, were you baking while I was gone? And he goes, oh no, Jane from across the way brought him over. So then I was thinking to myself, but I didn't want to say it. And I'm like, somewhere in that neighborhood is a girlfriend. I'm sure of it because she travels like 3 weeks out of the month. She's a very successful sales executive.
Or at the very least, a woman who creates supply, a woman who's flirty, a woman who's involved, a woman who likes them and shows it, and it's, again, they're often cultivating multiple sources of supply, backup sources of supply. And, sometimes it's an affair, sometimes it's not, but they always have, they do it at work, they do it at places they hang out, they do it in a neighborhood. They always have backup supply.
Right. Well, and I can guarantee that there are several women, as you were pointing out, they may not be actual girlfriends, but they're the ones that think he's funny. They laugh at all his jokes. They just think he's like, they just think that my client they all think she's the luckiest woman in,
right,
Southern California.
Yep.
And it's super sad. But forgot to talk about my seminar.
Because they haven't seen behind the curtain. All they're seeing is the person who's very gregarious and very popular and very nice and charming. That's all they've seen so far.
Right. Exactly. Well, you know what they say, if you see that family that seems, or that couple that seems super successful and they're driving around in their Porsches, first of all, they probably don't own them. They're probably paying ridiculous leasing, like $800 a month which is such a waste of money to like lease a car. But I want to take a quick pivot here for a minute because I forgot to talk about my seminar at the beginning. If anybody's watching to this point and they may not be able to stay till the end of our show, I want them to hear about this. And you should keep it in mind too, in case you hear of anybody or you think of anybody. Mm-hmm. This Thursday night from 7 to 8, I'm running a seminar called Suddenly Single, and it's for women who have become single over the last year. So it doesn't have to be suddenly like yesterday. But it could be a widow. You could be a widow. Your friend could be a widow. You could be someone that broke up with someone a year and a half ago, or maybe you were dumped. And now's the time when you're starting to think again about dating, but you think, I can't date. It's COVID. Well, that's not true. You can date just because of COVID. You can date. There's some really successful coupling going on right now because actually people have to work a little slowly because they don't get together and give each other big kisses and hugs on the first date, which I don't think they should do anyway on the first date. But this is my give back. It's a free seminar for women. They do have to be single. They can't be married. I'm going to do like a marriage and money seminar, hopefully in December or January. But this is going to be me and another life coach. So I'm going to be talking about how can women get rid of their baggage from their past to make themselves a better today person. and how can we expand who we are today. So we all can use some new class or some new hobby or some new activity to challenge ourselves and to make ourselves more interesting, but more than that, to make our own lives as fulfilled and interesting as we can make it. And then my friend Laura Burke she's a fulfillment coach, and she works with women to work toward their future self. So she'll be talking about that future stuff. But I'm going to be saying you can't go into the future and start dating until you've learned how to unpack some baggage and also how to create healthy boundaries. So I'll be talking about boundaries, what they are, what they're not, regardless of whether these women want to date again or not.
Right.
And so it's great. It's only an hour. It's going to be by Zoom. It's going to be great. It's going to be only just 1 hour on Thursday night. What's today? Tuesday. So yeah. So November 18th. I have it on my other Facebook page, but I should probably share it to this page somehow if I can figure that out.
Yeah.
Yep. So just want everybody to keep that in mind. But back to healing from the narcissist. One of the things that we talked about over the last week was really getting into the mindset of moving forward and going past all of this. And one of the things that we talked about today a little bit, we touched upon it, which is something that I was sort of saying that I'll be doing in the seminar and I do with my clients, which is teaching them, because everybody has a different vision or definition of what this really means, but the word is empowerment. And this author has an entire chapter on empowerment. And if you're going to move forward during the processing out of this toxic relationship, or you're outside of it, and you're still healing from it. The key thing with empowerment is learning how to be resilient. And a lot of women haven't had that. So it's sort of building your voice back up, right?
Yep.
And actually, I'm saying women, but honestly, I do have a couple of clients who are married to true narcissists. So I'm going to say men and women need to think about practicing these things. And that's what I do with my clients, because practice makes perfect. New habits never feel comfortable. Do you know what I mean? Like speaking up for yourself never feels okay for a long time if you're not used to doing that. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
We've talked about, someone that you dated for a while. And I mean,
well, the very dynamics of that type of relationship is that you're beaten down every time you do set up a boundary and every time you do push back a little bit.
Right. So how did you get to the point of this empowerment? Because when they say empowerment, they're starting to really sort of grab some of the self-talk, like having some self-respect and speaking up for yourself and following your moral compass, and just feeling like this just doesn't feel right. And I don't know if I can do it any longer, but it doesn't mean I'm a bad person.
That didn't happen during the relationship. It happened after the relationship.
Right. So, but how did you get to the point of actually just saying, this is it?
Well,
Or,
it's just sort of, it's the act of letting go of your control of the situation. It's your act of letting go of control over the other person. And this is a point we keep coming back to with narcissists. They will not change. They do not change. You cannot change them. And you have to get to that point. You have to get to the point where you stop giving them power. And it's about dealing with your own reaction to that narcissistic relationship, because you're empowering it. You're giving it power over yourself. You're not doing the trauma to yourself, but you're empowering the trauma to yourself. And the only way you can take power from them is to not give them power, because they have no power of their own. They're just reflecting back what you give them.
Right. Exactly.
So it's a reality of letting go that you have any control over the situation, and that, I mean, you have your part. You're not at fault, but you have your part, and recognizing what that part is, because once you recognize what that part is, that's when the changes start to happen, because you take that away. You take that power away.
Right.
Because they have power in the relationship even after the relationship's over. Because
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's not going to stop until you until you let go of that and break that connection.
Right. So this chapter, which is talking about, in order for you to recover and to heal from all this time, whether it was 6 months or 30 years, in order to build up your resilience, they've got this great quote which is not attributed to anyone. It's an unknown author. Sounds more like a Chinese proverb to me. A bird sitting on a tree is never afraid of the branch breaking because their trust is not in the branch, but in their wings. Resilience is your ability to bounce back from hurtful, abusive, or disappointing events. You are in the process of increasing your resilience through the healing that you are doing now. Your level of self-respect, self-worth, ethical principles, and ability to effectively stand up for yourself all contribute to emotional resilience.
Yeah.
And this is something I work on with my clients, but it's really important to work on this with someone that's been with a narcissist because they've lost their self-control. They've lost their self-confidence. They learned not to speak up. Like you said, you're not going to get anywhere. I mean, that is just not fun when you speak up to a narcissist.
No, they turn it around on you. They make it your fault.
Right.
They blame you. And then that's the point where you start, that's hopefully the point where you begin to realize that you aren't, and this is, we keep equating narcissists to addicts because of the difference of their frame of thinking, the way they think, the way they operate. And at a certain point, you have to realize you're no longer dealing with reason. And that's once you reach that point, that's when it starts, you start beginning to let go because you understand it's not your fault. They're not being reasonable. They won't be reasonable. You're just not in a reasonable argument. And at a certain point, as you've been in arguments with people, I'm sure, outside of relationships, and you realize there's just no point in going on with this. There's no point in litigating this argument anymore because they're not listening to reason and we're just not getting anywhere. And that's the point you have to get to with a narcissist.
Right. Right. And so I don't know. I don't think she's watching today because she's so busy, but Cheryl, who's often asked us questions and made comments during the show, she's going through a divorce with a narcissist. And the diving point was when she, sat down and said, she had overplanned what she was going to say, how she was going to say it, where she was going to say it, what night and everything. And she basically sat down and lovingly looked at him and, very non-confrontational, not like this, right? But just sort of like, Lou, can we just have so they're sitting like on a couch and she said, I just have, can I be honest? I just want to sort of talk about what I'm seeing in this relationship. And of course he's fine with that because he's ready to like fire off the stuff that he thinks she's done.
Yep.
But she started with, look, I just have to be honest. I feel like some of the ways that you've been acting lately, like towards your children or your ex, and even toward me, have been just really just hurtful and not coming from a heart of love and caring. I mean, and what she was basically saying is, look, there's a nice way to say things and there's a really crappy way to say things, but without saying that, right?
Yeah, right. Well,
he blew up. And then he gets more and more angry at the fact that she's basically calling him out for not being, not working with a sincere, loving attitude.
Yeah, she's blowing up the image he's projecting. Yes.
Right. Even though she worded it in the most innocuous way that I don't even think I could ever do. I don't think I could have pulled it off, but it boomeranged. It was not her intention to have this launch into a separation and divorce at all. She was hoping this would launch into because we always think the narcissist will eventually say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That's not what I meant. I'm going to be defensive, but
we think that the narcissist will respond to reason. That's what keeps you going, and they won't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason, Lou, is because the reason why this is so difficult is because we would, if someone called us out on something, even though we might try to defend ourselves on why we yelled or why we said whatever, we might at very least apologize for that episode. Right.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I lost my cool. You're right. Like that was, I actually was yelling because I do care, but I know I'm going to work on that. But a narcissist is never going to do that. And what transpired that night was he got more and more worked up into a rage. It was now, all about her and all her terrible things that she's ever done. And he went into like this major defense mode, got up, was walking around, got himself more and more worked up. But within 15 minutes, he's yelling at her.
Yep.
and he's walking around the house, and before you know it, he's upstairs and he's still yelling stuff at her because he always has to have the last word. And since she wasn't talking back, he figured, well, if you don't have anything, I'm just gonna keep talking until you try to interrupt me. And within an hour, he left. And he left pretty much with the clothes on his back. And the funny thing about it, which I think is kind of funny, but because she tells it this way, and she laughs about it. She's like, and then he left with her car. Because obviously he had her car key, an extra car key too. So he takes, her SUV for some dumb reason.
Yep.
Makes no sense.
He had a car, but he took her car.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, I mean, that's what started. And then she held her ground. She called a couple of friends and they all said, don't let him back.
Well, that was one of the awakening points, because again, you deal with reason and you get that response and you understand that reason isn't on the table right now. And that's, then you start to give up some of your load there. You start to understand what they're dealing with and the type of people they are. And it becomes a little bit more real at that point. Again, letting go of the fact that you can change this with reason.
Right. And the difficult part about that, Lou, is that not that there's ever a great time, but the timing felt wrong to her. That wasn't at all what her intention was of having a conversation. And this was big. But the funny thing is, it's like, if anything, it did show his true colors.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
right?
She was concerned with the relationship. She was talking about the relationship. He was threatened. His image was threatened. So, and that's the most important to them. And that's when you get that narcissist rage, when you threaten their image that they're projecting, when you threaten again, showing up how big of frauds they are. That's when the rage starts to happen.
Right. I mean, have you ever seen that with someone that you think was a narcissist, that when they're confronted, they often storm out? It's like, hey, you don't get to just leave you don't just get to leave the house or the room, or I don't know. I've never been the person that leaves the room. I mean, it's such a cowardly thing to do, unless it's getting violent and you're like, you know what, let's table this till tomorrow night. Right.
Yep.
Have you ever seen that where someone's like,
yep. It's happened once or twice. For the most part, see, I was a particularly good candidate for her. And again, my person, I don't believe was a narcissist, but had very strong narcissist tendencies. And there were a lot of similarities. Yep. I was a really good candidate for that. And I was manipulated pretty easily. So any dissatisfaction coming from her, I would back down. And she knew how to play that. But there were a couple situations where, she literally walked out. We're getting into conversations that didn't go well, and there was rage, and then there was an exit. Yeah.
Right.
Because they can't keep up the show anymore. You get into these situations conversationally where there is no recourse for them. And a lot of times when confronted with things, I would get why are you causing drama? And I'm thinking, I'm not causing drama. I'm pointing out the drama you're causing.
I know. It's like crazy talk, Lou.
Yeah, it is. It is. But then for a long time, you just rationalize it as, she's just strained right now. And, maybe I pushed too hard on this particular subject at this particular time. She wasn't ready for it, that type of thing. But yeah, they're very good at turning it around. But you get to a point sometimes where they don't have that, I don't know, the way the emotions work, not going to work for them. So you get rage and you get walked out and you get ghosted for a while.
Right. Right. Oh yeah. The nice silent treatment.
Yeah. And then, as I used to call it afterwards, came the just like nothing happened.
Oh yeah.
That's a little while later, you get contact and it was as if nothing happened. Just
super
pick up
healthy
right before the conflict and, just go on from there.
Yep. Yeah. And you sit there going, I'm not going to get anywhere if I bring up the fact that we really need to talk about what that was.
Yep.
Right? It's like you get into this mode of understanding. If I'm going to keep trying to be with this person, I know I can't bring that argument from 5 nights ago up again.
Yeah. And by the way, for me being conflict averse, it took me so much to work up to get into that conversation, or I get trapped in that conversation somehow when I didn't want to. And then you get the little ghosting, and then you get the just like nothing happened, and you sort of leave from the lack of conflict. You don't want to open up the conflict again. That's part of my pathology. It's part of who I was. So a lot of stuff didn't get picked up again because, I'm just happy that she's happy. I don't
Right.
want the conflict. Yeah.
Right. Oh, thank God the calm is here. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So, in order to get through this section of empowerment, here are some questions for reflection at the end of this chapter, which I think are really good. Rate your sense of emotional strength and power from 1 to 10 during your relationship with the narcissist. Also, rate it before and after the relationship. What do you notice? How would your loved ones rate it? What would you change if you listened to yourself more? How well do you follow your own values and your conscience? Spend a whole day tuning into your gut. What does it have to say? Because a lot of times our gut is telling us something, but we just try to ignore it, right?
Yeah.
Like even though our gut says that wasn't normal or whatever,
Oh yeah.
our head says give her a chance, give her another shot. Like
Oh, I
she's
guarantee.
stressed out.
I guarantee you, in the height of the conflict, at times, if you're dealing with a person with narcissistic tendencies or a narcissist, you have thought to yourself, "What human does that?" You've you thought the way they reacted was inhuman, or whatever they did or how they reacted was inhuman. You just can't comprehend it. You don't know how someone can be that way,
Well,
and
it's
then you
funny.
just start passing it off as they're stressed, or you put them in a bad position, or
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you said that, Lou, because last night in the divorce care support group, our topic was forgiveness. And it's
yeah.
always a difficult one. It's the reason why it comes on week 10.
Mhm.
It's not week 2. There's a 13-week program. And one of the things that they talked about in the video, because this has like a 30-minute video that we watched that has counselors and people like me who have been through a divorce talking about that particular topic, what we learned from it, what we did well, what we didn't do so well. And the counselors were talking about the fact that forgiveness is a really hard thing to do because we humans who have been hurt and damaged by this other person or dumped or whatever, right? We see forgiveness as giving somebody a get out of jail card. But really what it does is it gets us out of jail, right?
Yep.
And the reason why
Yeah,
we're
exactly. That's a great point. That's an
right,
excellent point. Yeah.
right, because us holding on to the bitterness and anger and like, well, she's a nut or he's a nut, you know, um, continuing to hold on to bad feelings and things and not when you don't forgive somebody, it's basically letting go,
Yeah.
right? And there's no other action or emotion that is the same way, but it's important to remember that the reason why we need to do this is because when we think of ourselves as hurt, like a broken heart, or they hurt our feelings, think of that hurt as like a physical bruise, right? And for a physical bruise, you might put ointment on it, you might put a band-aid on it, but the the real thing is you're tending to it.
Yeah.
With an internal one, like your brain is all messed up because of how somebody treated you or whatever, or you literally are having like chest pains and panic attacks because you physically can feel it in your heart. The only thing that ultimately is going to solve that is forgiveness. And
Yeah.
forgiveness is not forgetting,
No.
forgiveness is letting go.
Right.
So that it's really saying, you know what? Not my circus, not my monkey. You know, it's it's not saying that what they did is okay.
No.
It's letting yourself out of the jail that you're in because bitterness is like a pill that you want the other person to take and die. The problem is
Yep.
you've taken the pill because you're the only one that's still bitter. And so the other person's moved on. Have you ever noticed that?
Yep. There's
Fascinating to me how a narcissist can move on.
this person in my life had 2 or 3 sayings during the course of our time together that
Nice.
stick with me all the time. Just real pearls of wisdom. One of which was, and you're going to find it funny, but she used to say, "You can't blame a pig for having a short neck."
For having a what?
You can't blame a pig for having a short neck.
Okay. Didn't even know that was a thing with pigs.
Well, yeah, they have no neck. But but
Never
the
heard
thing
of
is,
that.
that's where you have to get with the narcissist, where you understand that the narcissist is who they are. No matter what you do, you're not going to fix this problem. You're not going to change it. No matter what you do to a pig, their neck is not going to get longer. And you just
Was
have
she
to
talking about wait, was she talking about herself?
no, it was just when she would talk about somebody and it was the basis of, well, you can't change who they are.
Okay, but it's so funny because that's her, but she was talking about other
Yeah,
people.
exactly. In retrospect, this lingers around. In retrospect, this was the key thing for me in terms of turning the corner on my healing. You cannot blame her for who she is. Well, blame might be the wrong word. You got to let go of who
Right,
she is and you got to accept who she is because you can't
right,
change it.
right,
Right.
right. Did you have any other good words of wisdom? Because that one's hilarious that she said it about other people.
Yeah. Now she had, there was one that was when the woman stops fighting, the relationship is over. That was a big one. And that's an important one. And that's absolutely true. The last thing you want is a woman who's quiet.
Interesting,
Yeah.
because she's
Because
given up.
when they
She's
go,
given up.
yeah, when they're going at you, they're still in a relationship. They're still working. But if they're silent, if they've just given up, yeah, they've basically given up. And the other one was, what's more important, the issue of the relationship, which was funny because she never recognized the difference. But
Okay,
that's a great one. That's a great one to live by. Whenever you get into one of these situations where you're dealing with conflict, what's more important, the issue of the relationship?
but you say that all the time
Yeah, because I think it's wise. I think it's
because
super
you can
wise.
see the difference. Right,
Yeah.
right,
Yep.
right,
She couldn't, ironically. But
right. Well, and it is funny how some I've just known so many people over the years that feel like to have this deep, honest, integrated, woo-woo love life that you should be able to say anything and everything, when and where and how you want to, because I need to just be myself. And I always caution people, I'm like, if you want to act like that as a single person and your friends accept that and your family accepts whatever that is, I'm not saying it's egregious, but you can live that way, but not in a relationship. And
yeah.
we all do this at a certain point where we think, oh, I should be able to say that, or I should be able to like weigh in more on like whether or not we go to my in-laws. But what, like you would say, because sometimes that I know that can be a hard thing when people are actually in a happy marriage to a degree. You're trying to balance like your family, their friends, your friends. But at a certain point, you have to stand back and say, okay, I'm not going to go to his family for every holiday,
Yeah.
but I could give Thanksgiving up this year. No, if I can say, I really was looking forward to going up there. Can we please be sure that we go, to my mom's in Vermont next year? Right.
Yep.
I'm just making that up. But like you would say, is the holiday going to, is that the most important thing? Or are you going to work to like preserve the relationship?
I think the emphasis goes in another place. I think the emphasis goes into safety. And what safety is in a relationship is that even if you're in conflict, you guys are going to be okay. And you're on the same side.
Right.
And do you watch Yellowstone?
No, but I've been meaning to watch it. Do you think it's a good show?
It's an awesome show. It's an excellent show.
Come on, you already had us watch Trailer Trash Boys, whatever they're called, Trailer Park Boys.
No, this is very good. And there's this couple that in the show last night. There's this couple in there that is highly dysfunctional on a number of different levels.
Okay.
They're really interesting people, but you love them. And they're a couple together, and they're having a conflict about something. And the woman walks up to the guy and says, "I love you, and I'll see you tonight, but F you."
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Yeah, so it's like I'm not happy with this, and we disagree on this, but it's okay. We're okay.
But it's a riot that she said it like that.
And she walked away, and he chuckled and turned around, and that's, to me, that was the epitome of where a relationship should be. It's like, I disagree with you on this. I'm not going with you on this. I need more on this, but
Right.
In the end, it's okay because we're okay together.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but you spent so much time with that other person. I don't know if you've I don't know if you've really had that many long-term relationships because
No.
yeah. But so I have had many long-term, meaning like, 1, 2, 3 years type of thing. And it's interesting to look back because there were certain people that I knew that like after a disagreement, hopefully there weren't too many arguments because like I hated those relationships where if there were a lot of arguments, I'm like, this sucks, right? It's like, thank God I'm not married to this person, but then I knew that I had to try to extricate. I had to figure out an escape plan. Because if you're doing that during the dating, it's not gonna stop just because you got married, right?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of the dance that we were doing. And I remember thinking, it's kind of interesting, like sort of to what you were saying. I remember thinking at a certain point, oh my God, like we're just arguing about and disagreeing on like so many issues. And it's one thing to have healthy disagreements, like, okay, you're going to talk about, you want to get a white dog and I want to get a brown dog or whatever. And we're kind of like, well,
Yep.
Or you want to paint the kitchen yellow and I would rather have something like a pale green, whatever, eventually, hopefully we can work that out. But, there are people out there and they're not even a narcissist who like to argue for argument's sake. I don't know. I don't know what it's all about, but there are people that if you said blue, they'd say, nah,
Yep.
that looks a little bit more greenish to me. It's like, oh my, like,
Yep.
you don't have to argue about the water. We're in the Caribbean. I said it looks like a beautiful turquoise. I don't care that you want to, but those people like,
Yep.
you can't even just say, I know this ocean is gorgeous. No, they'd have to correct you and say, really? I don't know. I think it's more green. And you sit there going, you just destroyed the day. You just destroyed the moment. Like, right?
Yeah. Keep that to yourself.
Keep
you
it
don't
to
have
yourself.
you don't have to confront everything.
Right.
And there are people who want to confront everything and they want to disagree. They're just disagreeable because it presents a certain superiority or, it feeds them in some way. And of course, those people, I invite you to try to figure out what it is, why, what you gain from arguing with the person you care about what color the ocean is. What did you gain?
I know. But when you're dating someone like that, you need to think about walking or maybe running because that's just it's not a healthy thing. Like I shouldn't have to correct and throw my opinion in with my husband every time he says something that I don't agree with. It's like, I can already see it coming. He's going to want to use certain dishes for Thanksgiving and I don't. He's going to want to set it up a certain way. But like, I just have to like take a step back and just like say, you know what? Like I'll do something different. Like I'll decorate the hallway or something, like whatever.
And a lot of that is unnecessary, but a lot of times there's a conflict and there's an outcome that they want to influence, which is fine. We all have our interests and we have outcomes that we want to influence, but they don't even put the time in. I talk about approach all the time. It's like, if you have a disagreement and you want to bring that person around to your point of thinking or get the outcome that you want, how about using the most effective approach? And for a lot of people, me included, confrontation isn't the right approach.
Right.
Sit down and talk to me, or don't make it personal or don't make it an argument. It's like,
right.
I'm willing to listen. Let's just sit down and talk about it. And a lot of people think that's the only way they get things done, or they don't care. They're serving another issue. They're serving another issue besides the issue that you're arguing about. But if you want to be effective with people, you have to understand how people, we've talked about this on the show all the time. The assumption is that people hear what you say. And that's always
that's a riot.
Yeah. And that's always a bad assumption because nobody hears what you say exactly because they're hearing it through their filters. You know what you meant, but you don't know how it landed with them. And that's something to be effective, especially with a partner. You have to understand how things land with them. And it doesn't mean coddling them or anything like that. It just means that, listen, if I open up with, what the hell did you do that for? A lot of people are going to shut down. Right? You're not going to have any productive discussion after that because the other person feels threatened. They're in conflict mode. They're circling the wagons, or they're fighters and they just stop fighting back immediately.
I know.
That's not an effective way to get a point across. What the hell were you thinking?
Right.
That just starts conflict and people react to conflict differently. If you really want to modify the behavior, find an approach that works. Understand your partner and, and do it in a way that they can accept it and you can be effective having a conversation.
Right. And this is why we say date for a long time, make marriage. If marriage is your goal, don't have the engagement and proposal happening anytime within a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
because you need to date for a long time so you can work these things out, because most relationships have a few bumps, and you need to see how your future spouse or partner is going to process through, because if they're not, everything's great until it isn't. Like I always say, love is easy when it's easy.
Yeah.
And so you need some bumps, and they may not come in the first month of dating. They may be 9 months later when Thanksgiving comes around.
On my baseball side, in the baseball world, when we're talking about prospects, you don't know anything about the prospect till they've suffered adversity, right?
Oh, good one.
You never want the player, you never want the kid to come out of college and start playing in the minors and everything goes right for them. And then you bring them up to the majors. You want to see them have a slump. You want to see how they deal with it. And you don't know anything about a relationship till you've had some adversity, till you've been in the foxhole with the person, to see how they respond to being upset and whether they throw you under the bus, throw you off the boat, or reach out for you. You know, you want to know the tenor of how they're going to respond when things get a little tough.
Yeah. And what you talked about earlier, Lou, is so important. It's also the after argument. So let's just say somebody storms out and they suck at saying they're sorry.
Yep.
That's your opportunity to say, hey, let's talk about what happened. And if they're not willing to talk about it, and just say, look, I'm not expecting you to say you're sorry all the time or whatever, but I am expecting us to not ignore something after it happened. But it is okay to talk about it a day or two later. In fact, I tell my couples, if you're having a heated argument on a Saturday or Saturday afternoon, one person has the right to say, you know what, this is just too much. We're not getting anywhere, or I don't feel like I can talk about this any longer today. Can we please sleep on it and talk about it again tomorrow? You don't get to table it indefinitely. Yeah. You can table it to the next day. But same thing is like when someone storms off, it's like when someone hangs up on you. That's like the ultimate FU, right? Like that. I've been hung up on, I can probably count it on like 3 fingers.
Yep.
It's the most incredibly, it's the thing that got me the maddest, I think, almost in any of my past relationships. I'm like, oh my God, did you just hang up on me? But you have to be able to talk about it a day or two later. You have to. And that is what I teach my dating clients. I'm like, do not put up with this. Like, you're not going to be working with me as a dating coach in 5 or 6 months, because I only work with them for 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes I jumpstart it for like 4 weeks, depending on what people want. You need to be able to look at this and say, you know what, when there's a disagreement, even if it's not a big fight, you need to be able to circle back and talk about it. Maybe not that same day, but the next day. Hey, I was thinking about that stupid argument about the school system or something, whatever it is. I just want to clear the air on that.
Yep.
And if you avoid it, you've started the slippery slope, because that means you've set the precedent. When we don't agree, I'm not going to bring it up. So that means we're probably never going to bring things up. You've started like a way of not relating.
Right.
But anyway, we got to go because it's after 12.
Yes.
Next week, we're going to talk some more. We're getting there. We're getting to the end of the book. We're going to talk some more about this wonderful book, Healing from a Narcissistic Relationship. Buy it if you're in one or you just got out of one. And we're going to be talking about some of the stuff at the end of the book, which is transform your life.
Yep.
New ways, which I love. I love that. New ways of living and loving. Woo! That's not juicy. If that doesn't bring you back to watch this video again,
that's right.
I can't think of anything more exciting myself, but that's because I love our topics and our time together.
All right. So past episodes here on the Coach Judith Facebook page.
Right.
And join us next week for the next new edition.
That's right. And if you watched this, please take this podcast and share it on your Facebook page. Be well, be healthy. Thanks, Lou.